Hey friends, on this episode of the Incredible Hulk podcast, we are joined by my dear friend, Scott Welch. He is the founder of Global Bridge Builders, spends all of his time talking about diversity in the workplace, race, and race relations. So I thought, what better time to bring him on and see if we can unpack some of the stuff that's going on. So this is a very candid and fun conversation. I think I can say fun, yes, that Scott and I are calling Peace and Joy. The idea being that peace is that center of the hurricane, right? Everything is still falling apart, but you're able to find peace, and joy being the emotion that picks up all of the other emotions, right? Joy and happiness are two very different things. So it's about finding joy going through something like this in order to get to a better place. With that, I will let you enjoy this episode of the Incredible Hulk podcast. Scott, how are you, my friend?
Eric, my brother, how you doing, man? It's great to see you.
It is great to, I wish we were doing this in person, but it is great to be seen.
Yeah.
I obviously wanted to talk to you because of all that's going on, right? I don't want to bury the lead here as to why are we doing this, but we're doing this podcast, guys, because shit's on fire. That's why we're doing this. And, and anyone who has listened to this podcast knows that I want to go be inquisitive about the world around us, and I want to go to people who are much smarter than me. And so for those of you who don't know Scott and I struck up a very quick friendship once we figured out that I had hosted TEDx and he had hosted TEDx, so therefore we should be friends. And as soon as we met, we've been off to the races. He has since been on this podcast. I think this is your fourth time, but it's been a minute. Yeah. I think it's been almost 2 years since you've been on the podcast.
Yeah.
And we touched base about a week ago because obviously everything was getting crazy, and you said, "Hey, I've been wanting to talk to you," and I said, "Well, that's weird because I've been wanting to talk to you, so we should maybe talk." And so, Scott, I want to start here, and I want to know how you're doing, and I preface this by saying, when you enter into a phase like this, where the way I'm viewing it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the way I view it is like this wound has been re-exposed. And I think you can explain time in American history in a couple ways. And specifically around race and slavery, it might be explained like this. There was slavery, then there was Jim Crow, then there was new Jim Crow. And then there was a moment around 2008 that some experts would call post-racism when Barack Obama comes into office, and now we're here. And I don't know if you ascribe to any of that history. I'd love to dive into that. But all of that to say that there's this insane mixed bag of insanity right now, and I want to know, to start out, how are you?
Well, first of all, brother, it's just I appreciate you, and I appreciate just the way that you just kind of dig in and ask and just show your concern. I appreciate that. And the way that you summarized history just a minute ago was genius. So it was like, yeah, I mean, it was just one of those things, right? When we want to take kind of this look at it. And to the question of how am I doing? I'm doing well. And I think of course, these types of times kind of can cause you to be more introspective, right? I think we will look back at this time in history like some folks look back at the 60s. When I was studying in undergrad, we would study the 60s.
Sure.
I think we're at a moment in time that is really pretty remarkable. And I was just talking to my cousin last night in Dallas, and we said, this is really interesting. You've got a pandemic. You've got a multi-ethnic kind of push back against things that people say, no, enough is enough. Then you've got our president who really, and I'd never speak against our president in that way. It's just like, he's not leading us right now. Right.
Right. Yes.
Wherever people are, I'm like, hey, that's not even my point. My point is, I just don't feel like we're being led. Then the second part, and then the fourth part of that is that the economy it's all attached too. So we've got this four-pronged thing, dude, that is going on. That I tell you what, I told my cousin, I said, this is one of the best times ever to be alive, though, because I feel like I'm walking inside of a lab or an experiment right now. It's a strange time, Eric.
Oh, it's a very strange time, and what I keep going back to is there's a number of organizations across the globe that study catastrophes that could be coming. Yeah. And if you look at the report that came out in December of 2019, There was 10 things on that list, and we're doing 3 of them right now. So one of them was a global pandemic. One of them was white nationalism, and one of them was an economic collapse that was not necessarily connected to a global pandemic, but in this case, this is what you got, right? And it's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you for a couple reasons. Now, our friendship notwithstanding, right? One of them is the way in which you address these things, and we talked about this a week ago when we were getting ready for this. Is this idea of peace? And you and I talk a lot in our real life when we're not doing podcasts. We talk a lot about this idea of peace and joy, and the idea that joy is actually all of the emotions described in one word, and peace is essentially the center of a hurricane. It's not when everything is going amazing. It's when you're able to kind of center yourself when you are surrounded by turbulent winds and stuff flying around your head and all that stuff. And
it's true.
And I'm wondering, with the work that you do, and I want you to talk a little bit about it so people kind of can reset as to what you do for a living. You spend all of your time talking about race and race relations. And so how has this changed at all for you? Are you having different conversations? Because one of the things that you and I connect on is that this feels like a moment. It feels different than Barack Obama becoming president, which was absolutely a moment, and then we moved on, right?
That's right.
But this feels different. This feels different than anything that I have been alive to witness. And I wonder, in the work that you're doing in race and race relations, has this changed the training? Are they asking different questions? Like, what goes on in your professional life?
So let me see, just to kind of in terms of what I do, right? So I started a firm 2005. I've been involved in this diversity management since 1999, right? And really dove in 2000. And it's a firm I started in 2005 that actually looks at organizational transformation. Our focus is, our mantra is innovation through inclusion. So we look at systems, man, all over in all these organizations, Eric, metric setting and supply chain and everything, right? Now, of course, a part of that has to deal with ethnicity and race, right? We go in there and we'll say, okay, the differences in your organization, if we can help you look at that differently, that these aren't disadvantages. These are not issues. These are opportunities. So our encouragement is actually dive deeper into your workforce, because in their differences are actually innovative ideas, right? So that's the work that I do. I'm always trying to push the fact that difference is actually good. And so when you talk about folks that are kind of approaching me and asking me questions, now, of course, everything centers around ethnicity and race right now, right? So,
yes.
The conversations and all the friends that I'm talking to, or just being on the different panels and things like that, it is going down that path. But, I tell people that the thing I love about this that's different from 2008 is, to me, if you look at our presidential election, that was from the top down, essentially. This is from the bottom up, right? And so, when things happen, especially with George Floyd, and then it was, Ahmaud Arbery, I mean, it was so many different things, right? It was people actually just in the streets, man, that just said, in neighborhoods, this is not good. And so people took the streets together. What I also love about it is it's multi-ethnic. You can't see where this community ends or begins. This is just people saying, this is not the nation that we are. We're better than this. And then I think, even to the fact that you've got moms and dads with their little 3-year-old toddlers with signs walking down the middle of the street in Grand Rapids. I was like, oh my goodness, where am I?
Right.
So I just think that, this is crazy. I think this is what I call, this is a T-ball moment. And what I mean by that, in comparison to fast pitch baseball,
yes,
this is something, if you swing at anything, Eric, you might, you can actually impact so many things positively. Just swings, like swing at something, swing at a new relationship, swing at going to a different business, swing at going to a different neighborhood. You can make a positive impact by just swinging right now. And I think that's where we are. I think this is a move of the people, man. It's not about politics. This is a move of the people, and I love it.
Well, and I was watching the Emmanuel Acho series, Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. He did one with Matthew McConaughey, and I think McConaughey said it in the video, but they both kind of echoed each other, and I thought this was a great way to explain it because it not only explains what's going on right now, but it does explain how you evoke change at any point in history, and it's this idea that the individual and the house affects the house affects the neighborhood affects the community
Bingo.
affects the city affects the state the nation, the globe, right?
There you go. Yes,
And
that's it. No, and again, that's it. It's funny because in times like this, just for me to say I love something in that sense, but you have to look at things like we talked about peace, like being it's in the eye of the hurricane, right? And we can't even make any progress, Eric, if we don't actually dig into the pain. People
Yeah.
are responding. I think we're taking to the streets and people are protesting because they're really the pain is a catalyst for change. And I think people get to a point where they say, you know what, I don't know what's going to happen if I take this risk, but I just know that the pain is too severe to stay here.
yeah, and I was telling you, I've spent most of the last month just on different levels of rage because
Yes.
I just well and
Right.
and you see stuff and if you're listening from anywhere outside of West Michigan, I will give you a little bit of geography. There was a city called Allendale that had a big public meeting, so it's a little bit north of where Scott is, I believe, and south of where I
Yep.
am.
Yep.
And they had this meeting about a Confederate statue, and I'm going to ask you about all that here in a second, but they allow everyone to make public comment because that is what we do as a society. And the very first comment, a gentleman stands up and says the Civil War had nothing to do with race. And it's at this point that I want to throw my laptop out the window and, instead I calmed down because one of the things that I'm trying to do is understand that there are systems in place that want us to fight one another because it's easier to deal with us when we hate each other.
Yes.
But at the same time, that sort of stuff just enrages me because I want to hear your point of view. And I've said this to my wife a couple times. It's like, if you don't agree with me, I want to go have a beer with you. I want to see if we can get to 60 seconds
Well said.
of connection. And if we can't, that's fine.
Right.
But I'm not sure that I can have a beer with a person who thinks the Civil War had nothing to do with, like, you have to have a basic understanding of an event in order to argue for or against it. Right. And that that sort of stuff makes me just like want to pull my hair out and just go, what? And it's my show. What the fuck are we doing? Right. What are we doing? What is going on?
Right. Eric, here's the thing. As you said, see what that has to do with when people say that one thing that clearly has to do with the other thing does not have anything to do with the other thing. That person lacks intellectual integrity.
Well, and they're going
right?
to this gentleman who I don't know is going to argue with you or me on the basis that the Civil War was the South seceding from the Union for states' rights. True. Now let's go one more. What state right did they really want? What was the
there
one?
You go. See, and that's where the whole idea of intellectual integrity. It's like, you know what? Be honest about it, because as you said, I'm the same way. I love to sit down with someone. I don't mind having an opposing view and sitting down with someone, because at least even I may not even end up agreeing with them, but I get smarter by finding out where they're coming from. So I'm going to take something from that conversation. But when you don't have a basis of really reality, or one is not coming to you in integrity, to say, it's like, everybody knows if you dig a little bit. It doesn't take much digging to find out what the Civil War is about. But if you want to defend that lie, then you know what? Then it's hard to have a meeting point because you're dishonest.
Sure. And so, which leads me to the next thing I want to ask you. I want to get your perspective. Call it. We'll deal with a 2-week time frame, right? Like 2 weeks ago, we started ripping down Confederate statues across the nation, and that has since exploded into every historical figure in American history, right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering your perspective on that, because when you couple the gentleman from Allendale with this, we're going to rip everything down.
Yep.
This rewriting of history on either side becomes pretty problematic, because I don't know how you find a through line if
Yeah.
each side has their own version of history.
I know. No, you're right. Here's the thing. I mean, and if people find that, I was just talking to a young man about kind of our ways of expressing our rage, our anger, and people are going to do it differently. And what I loved about this is this young man said, because he's a trained boxer, right? He's a fighter, but he's also an artist, so he paints flowers and things. He says, Mr. Welch, I know my triggers. And so while my brother is going to go and protest down the streets in Detroit, that's not me because I know my triggers. I said, young man, you are so much further down the path because you know your triggers. And so the whole idea is, if that's his expression of, if his kind of like revolt is to paint, or if a music person is to write music, do that. Some folks take the streets, right? Sure. Then some folks want to pull down Confederate figures. I'm like, you know what? Hey, if that's what you feel like you got to do it, right? For me, it's going to be in words, right? I'm going to write. I'm going to have conversations, and I'm going to have these really in-depth conversations. So when they begin to pull down statues, I'm like, you know what? Some of the stuff, in particular, as you cited with Allendale, it's just, I mean, right next door to an amazing university, right? So.
Right.
I'm like, and so, even the president of the university talked about their commitment. I said, well, in her LinkedIn profile, I said, one of the things you want to do is you need to go ahead and talk with Allendale about what they said they didn't want to do. I said, now that would show GVSU's influence. Because, I mean, Eric, it's Confederate soldier, right? A soldier from the North, soldier from the South, and a little slave boy with cotton at the feet. And you don't think there's something wrong with that?
100%. And that's not my point. Is it feels like on both sides of this, it spirals out of control very quickly, right? Where you and I can both come to a consensus that one, come on, right? Like,
right. Exactly. We can have opinions, right? And that's the thing. And as you said too, it's not about, because it is easy, of course, to control the masses when they're at odds and fighting each other, not hearing each other. What to me a revolutionary act is to sit down, as you said, at the table with someone that you don't agree with and have a conversation. To me, that's revolutionary right there. And
no, go ahead.
And so that statue really, it really could be a really strong point for soul searching, because the thing I'm going to ask Allendale is, why do you feel the need to have it? Why do you feel the need to have it? And I'm looking at you as an African-American and say, okay, now you understand the history of this, right? And I think a lot of times the conversations that are happening, they're happening in rooms where everybody looks alike. And that's, to me, that's dangerous. Whether black, white, red, yellow, I don't care.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, confirmation bias or an echo chamber or whatever you want to call it.
I just think you got to have conversation in rooms where people are different from each other. I mean, I understand there's certain conversations that I think that need to happen within a particular group. I get that. But I think in terms of broad-based problem solving, because one act is going to affect the other act, you got to do that within a room of other people. You got to do that within a room of other people. So, you remember, when we had the radio show, Rick and I, years ago, there was a guy on CNN that Anderson Cooper was interviewing. He was a white supremacist on the campus of a university in Maryland, and he started the White Student Union. And they went and interviewed he said, why do you need to have this union? Because I wanted to protect the white women on campus. That was his response.
Sure.
And so they actually asked about 10 to 12 white students, female students, and they said, we don't need his protection. And he's very weird. We don't need him to be in our lives, right, on campus.
Right. Yeah.
And I said, Rick, I want to talk to that guy. Rick's like, really? I said, I want to talk to him because I just want to know how he's wired, So the producer went and got the contact for this guy, and we ended up having a conversation on the air. And what was really weird, Eric, is you could tell he was thinking I was going to be punching him and shaming him on the air, and I wasn't. I honestly just wanted to find out, like, how did you get here, right? I'm not here to beat you up. And he actually got nervous because I wasn't punching at him, because he had no defense against peace.
Right.
I'm not punching at him. I'm like, so who are your influencers? What was your childhood like? And I think if we can have more conversations, as you said earlier, with folks that we don't agree with, man, I just think to me that moves things further.
Because
You know?
we clearly can get to moments of consensus, right?
Yeah.
And you and I talked about this again about a week ago, maybe even 2 weeks at this point, right? We had this moment where we put a rocket into space, and the entire country came together to watch that happen, right?
Right. Yep.
And then, these are not comparative, but 10 days later, you have George Floyd, where the entire country comes together and goes, "You're right. That one is wrong." Right.
Yes.
And so when you can get a moment like that, it just feels
Yeah.
like, how do we build on top of that? Because it
Right.
feels to me, and I wonder how you feel about this, but it feels to me like we're back to pulling each other apart just more fervently. Right. If you go to like November, we'll call it October 2016, right, as we're ramping up to this election, there was a lot of that tearing and gnashing of teeth, and it feels like we've got the tearing and gnashing of teeth on like 1,000 right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's amped up, brother. It is really, really, it's really amped up. The thing is, what I noticed is when 2016 happened, I was with a client in an organization, right? This whole restaurant group, and they had crying rooms located in each of their restaurants, brother. Okay. When the election happened, obviously you can understand that obviously by that they didn't vote for President Trump. They had crying rooms and hug areas, right? What it did though, and then I would actually go out and ask my friends that were in art or in in music and radio. I just kind of I was just listening. What that election did is it spurred people, I think, to action of some sort. Now, to your point, it kind of like, okay, now it kind of normalized. But what I do think about this moment is that people, I don't know, I think people are kind of looking back at that moment in 2016 and saying, not again. And so what's occurring in the streets, I do think it's going to continue, but I also think that people are having kind of some flashbacks.
Sure.
And say, oh no, we're not going down this path again. And so I think that people are going to I think they're going to stay woke in many instances, not in all, but in many instances stay woke because there's no way that they want to go back to that. And within this context right now, right, this feels really awful, right? Because here's the thing.
Yes, yeah. There's the understatement of 2020, right?
Thank you. Right. I mean, you think about what caused people to the catalyst moment. That caused people to take the streets also, Eric, in Berlin and in London for United States. I hope that people just really keep their eyes open. And I told folks, I'm like, you know what? If you are on the wrong side of history for this one, particularly as a parent or as a leader, you know what? Just put on the T-shirt that says "I'm a coward," because you can be. I mean, this is very binary. It's like either you're on the side of justice or you're not, and you can't defend what we saw in the streets of Minneapolis, nor many other things that we do see. And so I think that it's one of those things where this is the moment. If you ever needed a moment served up to you to be courageous, this is that moment. And whatever courageous means to you, it might mean having a conversation with a person that you've never met before, but you got to do something right now.
Yeah, well, I have a friend, and I know I mentioned this to you off the air, but I got a friend, Marcus Collins, who just wrote I think it was an interview, not a piece. He wrote a piece about marketing right now, because that's obviously the universe that I live in, and they were asking him, what should brands be doing at this moment, and he was like, look, and he was using the legalization of gay marriage as sort of the case study, right? Because if you look at it from a branding perspective, it was a hot stove, right? We didn't touch it at all until it became in vogue. And then as soon as it was in vogue, we're all talking about it, and he was using that as this moment to say, look, you don't want to be the brand that's into equality and into inclusion when it's in vogue. Now is the uncomfortable time is the time to take a stand as a brand.
Yes.
And you saw it with Nike, who took it on the chin for 4 years.
Come on, that's
4
it.
years. right?
That's it. That's it.
And you can, whatever opinion you want to have on the NFL, you are welcome to that opinion. And
Mhm.
most of them I probably share with you, right? But the one thing I will tell you is all of all of that organization slowly pivoting in the favor of Colin Kaepernick, and you're now having discussions in the state of Michigan now that we've got ownership change at the Lions that they would be willing to take him on. Like we're clearly in a different universe, right? Because
Yeah. Yes.
I mean,
We
because I cannot remember. And again, neither of us are old enough actually to remember the McCarthy era, but like that
right.
was McCarthyism, and you've never seen a star in America done like that in 50 years, you know.
So true. That's so true, Eric. I mean, it is so true. And as you
And
said,
I don't mean this as a joke, but like the guy wasn't even on like Masked Singer or Dancing with like
come on,
no one touched him, like
you
nobody.
are so correct in that. And that's the thing. And as you said, we harken back to the McCarthyism where you actually you just completely isolate someone.
Yeah.
You know, have you seen the pictures? Someone sent me a picture of him kneeling and then Derek Chauvin kneeling on George Floyd. He said, and we call the kneeling
Oh yes, yeah.
wrong. We call this right. I'm like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
this is a crazy time we're living in, right? And people get, you probably have seen this too. People like they get enraged about the fact he's going to kneel. He's going to kneel, and it's like my thing is, and that's like, what is a real patriot? I thought a patriot was someone that really, of course, honored their country, but also honored the rights that we have as citizens in the country, right?
Yeah, and that when I was teaching mass media, then when I was teaching mass media, that was the I would spend an entire night talking about freedom of speech and saying, look, I'm no one here is impeding on your freedom of speech.
Right.
However, it is
Yeah.
not free of consequence. You are free to say
Bingo.
whatever you want
Bingo.
outside of
Bingo.
Justice Holmes and not screaming fire in a crowded right, like outside of that very
Right.
finite
Yes.
example, you are free to say whatever you like,
so
but you
true.
are not free to do it without consequence.
No, exactly right. And that's where it is, where it's like, you know what? Listen, when we just have to really come to terms with our duplicity as a nation. And I think when you drill it way down, we just have to, again, going back to intellectual integrity. Like if we're going to have a problem with something when it's obviously wrong, we have to really come to terms with like what's going on in us where we think that that's wrong now. Because there's certain people, like I saw some of the protests where the protesters were going through the streets and you have whites of course all rights on both sides of the street, a couple of them enacting George Floyd's situation again. I'm like, and how do you bring yourself to do that? He's got his knee on his white son's neck, right? And saying, get out of here, get out of our neighborhood. And the protesters are actually, what I loved, I saw some pictures where the protesters would stop and go to the side and say, let's talk about what you think we have that we have at odds with each other. Some of them, and I love one of the pictures I saw where this black guy is taking this white guy who was an alt-right guy off the road because they were trying to beat him up. He's like, no, we're not about it.
Yeah.
Right. And do you remember this? There was a picture that happened in Ann Arbor years ago, man, where the Klan walked through the middle of U of M, right through the center of the town, and all the anti-protesters for the Klan, they were kind of closing in on the Klan. This young black lady actually used her body as a shield and actually laid over this guy with his hood and everything. And I've got that picture that I've saved because I'm like, that's what this looks like. He was forever changed. And this guy that was just carried off by this black guy, he's forever changed.
Yeah. Yes. And this goes back to this conversation about peace, right? When you go back and if you don't want to read it and you want to listen to it, Seth Godin did a podcast where he has an audio reproduction of
wow.
the letter from the Birmingham jail written by Dr. King, right? If you go back and you listen to that piece or read that piece, however you want to consume that, peace is the way that you get through this, right?
It's true.
Connection is the way that you get through this, and
It is.
it's not adversarial. And
Right.
when we go back to talk about peace, I continually think about, I've spent 20 years in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and one of the first things that they teach you is when you're in an armbar or a chokehold or whatever, is that fighting it makes it worse, right?
Wow.
Like the way you get out of these things is you center yourself in the chaos of somebody trying to hurt you.
Wow.
And then you can move, right?
Yeah.
And this feels very much like the same thing, is that the thrashing and gnashing of teeth only makes it worse. It only makes it that you lash out on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or wherever. I mean, shit, man, you're even seeing it on LinkedIn, which I can't remember the last time I've seen political
Isn't that
stuff.
the truth?
It's crazy. But like that gnashing of teeth only makes it worse. It's when you go and you listen to a point of view that you don't agree with and try and find consensus. And I am not saying to anybody that you need to agree with somebody who has insane ideologies.
Exactly right. No, we're not saying that.
But you're also not going to change them by screaming at them.
No, you're not. It's going. The more emotional it gets, the more out of focus it gets, right? And I think it's the dehumanization of each other is what actually causes all this strife. When we humanize each other, we actually become more at peace and can have really more meaningful conversations. Like, I probably talked about it last time I was on the show about Ubuntu in South Africa. I am because you are. And our humanity is connected. And to the degree that I acknowledge your humanity, I'm more human. But to the degree that I marginalize your humanity, I'm less human. And so if we can actually humanize each other, humanize the alt-right, humanize all these folks that we might find ourselves being in complete contradiction with. And if we have somebody over there, because I believe that there's some folks over there that would be under that banner, that in their heart of hearts, man, I believe they'd say, well, I would like to have a conversation with something because something just doesn't feel right. Kind of like they know in their knower. It's like, you know what? People that look different from me aren't different species, or I don't believe all this stuff that they're talking about right now. But right now I'm just kind of caught it because so-and-so's involved and I'm involved and peer pressure happens and here I am. But I believe that there's in the core of these folks that there's something that they know that they're out of joint, and you can't grow and hate at the same time.
No, and you also, I would say this, it's also very difficult to hate close up. It's easy to hate a group of people.
Yeah, buddy, come on.
Either side of this, right? It's really difficult to get in Ralph or Sally or Susie's face and be like, I totally hate you. You are the worst.
Isn't that the truth? Like as you said, you the group, right, makes it easier because that's a faceless demographic.
Yeah. The protesters, the police, right? Like
that's right. But man, as you said, when you connect with that police person, right? And it's like, I know one of my buddies, John Witkowski, who was a cop, went to grad school together. Man, I love that dude.
Yeah,
and I'm like,
and that, Scott, that's the struggle here, right? Is like, you and I both have dear friends who are police officers, so I can't join your team that says they're all evil because that's not true.
It's not true, because here's the thing: once we do that, we might as well paint every group with a broad brush,
right?
And that's not true, right? All white people, all black people, all police, all Latinos. I'm sorry, that is just not right, and I can't. Here's the thing: in my knower, I can't do that because but that's the beauty too, of having your relational ecosystem have so many different people. And I tell folks, do life together with somebody that's different from you.
Yeah.
Right. Because when people want to say they're all no, that's not true.
No.
Because no, I got people I call brothers. I got folks I call sisters that come from that group. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to side with you on that right there because it's just true.
I always think about, there's a scene in the movie version of World War Z. And there's a scene where they're in Israel and Brad Pitt is talking to a character in the movie and he's saying the way that they fix problems is they have this guy whose job it is to be the 12th man. and his job is to not agree with anything that's happening in that room, right?
Ooh.
And I see that, I think about that scene all the time, not because I like zombie movies, because I do, but I think about that like in my life. Who do I
Yeah.
have in my life who's going to tell me everything I'm doing is jacked up, and I get to defend that position?
Right. See, the
Because
thing is, though, what you think about it, Eric, a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't have. They don't want to go into rooms where people disagree with them. And you think about that. Okay, it might be comfortable, but it's so debilitating.
well,
When you,
we don't have time to do this, and I would love to do this again. This
yeah,
particular thing, part of the problem, man, is like the system known as the public school system, because they don't teach them how to think. They teach them how
I
to
know,
answer. And so
dude.
they can't go into rooms and argue their point of view because they don't have one. They have one
Right.
that they were given.
Right. They tell them what to think as opposed to helping them learn how to think.
Right.
Right. And so to dump in the contents, I mean, for me and my wife, we've always taught our kids, you're going to university right now, or even to high school. We're going to teach you, you learn, take the contents. The whole idea is this should teach you how to problem solve. We're going to show you how to think. And so you need to know how to defend your position, right? Either for or against, or however you're going to moderate this. But again, if you're not used to having to defend, right, your position, if you're not used to having to solve problems, if you're not used to being in rooms where people are really different from you, or relationally it's just difficult. You really, I mean, to me, those are the fundamentals of life. I
And
mean,
it's one of the things, Scott, that I think often I was obviously blessed enough to be able to go to get my master's degree. And when I entered that program and it was nothing but papers, presentations, and defenses, I went, why isn't this school?
isn't that,
Why
yeah,
don't we
come
just
on.
do this from kindergarten on? Like,
Can you imagine, Eric, if we started that at kindergarten for our
oh my
young?
Lord, do you have any idea what sort of savages, like
Oh,
intellectual
dude,
savages you would
they would,
have if they
it'd
could
be
argue
awesome.
at 5?
At 5, man. I mean, think about that. And again, I think we dismiss our kids. We kind of limit their capacity by our own limited perspective of them. They have so much more capacity than what we give them. And like you said, if we could teach our kids to critically think and debate an issue and present and to be storytellers, imagine, like you said, once they got, I mean, a 5-year-old, a 10-year-old, middle school, high school, they would be off the charts in their cultural competency and ability to engage.
Yeah, well, and most assuredly, there are 5 and 10 and 15-year-olds that can do
True.
that, but that's because their parents are
That's
facilitating
right.
that,
That's
right?
the exception.
What 100%. But we're all, we're also at a parenting moment, right? A twofold parenting
Yes.
moment where you've spent hundreds of days of saturated time because you're in the same place, not really able to go the places you would normally go, right?
Uh-huh.
So, for us, it's been
Yep.
an exercise, to your point, in letting go and letting them be kids, because I don't have a choice, right?
Right.
Like, I don't have a choice to put my box over the top of them because I have to work. I like whatever the thing is, right?
Right. Right.
And then you also have this moment where they're asking some hard questions, especially
Yeah,
my 8-year-old who actually understands what's going on. They want to know because
they do.
especially with George Floyd, right? They were brought up believing that police
Yeah.
officers are there to help you, and here is a moment where this police officer is clearly not doing that.
Yes. Right. It is. This is again. This is a teachable moment for all of us, right? I think more than anything, I think there's a kind of an overarching posture that I wish we all could have, and that is to be teachable in this
Yes,
moment.
yes. Well, and that's what's the Buddhist proverb, something about like the adult who can still dream is the child that lived, right? Like the person who still has that curiosity is the one that allowed their childhood to kind of come through into adulthood.
Yeah, it's. I mean, it's just true, But as you said, when we find where we just stop listening to each other, that is a very toxic place to be in. It's like they call it the Dead Sea because no water comes in, no water comes out, and you can float on it, right?
Right. Yes.
But the healthy, I mean, those big bodies of water, they've got exchange, right? And if we're going to be healthy as individuals, we have to have exchange in our lives, right? And it makes us healthy. So when we decide and go over and just hang out in this little bitty corner of the room where everybody agrees with us, I just think we get dull. I think we get really dull and really stupid when we do that.
Skot, it's always a pleasure, my friend. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
They can email me at SKOT, Scott, a little different, at globalbridgebuilders.com, or go to the website, globalbridgebuilders with an S.com.
They can't find you on TikTok?
No, they can't. They can't. It's so funny. My daughter, maybe, my son, but not me.
My friend,
so funny.
Always a pleasure, my friend. I hope you have a wonderful week. Stay healthy. Say hi to the kids. We'll talk soon.
Do the same. Thanks, buddy. Bye-bye.